The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Highway 41 as Garth Brooks pulled his modest rental car into the parking lot of Thompson's Family Diner. The faded sign creaked gently in the Tennessee breeze, and through the large windows, he could see families enjoying their Sunday dinner. After 3 weeks of sold-out arenas and screaming crowds, the simple sight of ordinary people sharing a meal felt like a breath of fresh air. Garth adjusted his worn baseball cap and checked himself in the rearview mirror. No designer clothes today, no stage makeup or perfectly styled hair, just a simple flannel shirt, faded jeans, and work boots that had seen better days. This was exactly how he wanted it. Anonymous, normal, human. He'd been driving for hours, needing this break from the whirlwind of his comeback tour. At 52, Garth had already proven everything he needed to prove in country music. He'd broken records, won every award worth winning, and touched millions of hearts with his songs. But sometimes, the weight of fame felt heavier than any guitar he'd ever carried on stage. The bell above the diner's door chimed as he stepped inside. The aroma of fried chicken and fresh biscuits immediately transported him back to his childhood in Oklahoma, to his grandmother's kitchen, where music first became his refuge. A few patrons glanced up briefly before returning to their conversations. Exactly the reaction he'd hoped for. Sarah Mitchell, a waitress in her mid-30s with kind eyes and a warm smile, approached him with a menu. "Welcome to Thompson's, honey. Just yourself today?" "Yes, ma'am," Garth replied, his voice carrying just the hint of his Oklahoma drawl. "Something by the window would be nice, if you have it." "Of course, right this way." Sarah led him to a small table overlooking the parking lot. The vinyl booth was patched in a few places, and the Formica table showed years of use, but everything was spotlessly clean. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" "Sweet tea would be perfect, thank you." As Sarah walked away, Garth took in the restaurant's atmosphere. Family photos covered one wall, showing what appeared to be 3 generations of the Thompson family. Local high school sports trophies lined a shelf behind the counter. This was clearly more than just a business. It was a cornerstone of the community. At a nearby table, an elderly couple shared a piece of apple pie, their weathered hands intertwined. A young mother fed her toddler while simultaneously helping her older son with what looked like homework. In the corner booth, a group of teenagers debated the merits of their high school football team's chances this season. This was America, Garth thought. Real America. Not the America of record labels and radio stations, but the America he'd grown up in and continued to sing about even as his life became increasingly removed from it. "Here you go. Sweet tea, fresh from the pitcher." Sarah set down the glass and pulled out her order pad. "Have you decided what you'd like, or do you need a few more minutes?" Garth glanced at the menu, noting the reasonable prices and home-style offerings. "The fried chicken dinner sounds perfect. And maybe some of those biscuits I've been smelling since I walked in." "Excellent choice. Our cook, Betty Williams, has been making those biscuits for 15 years. Same recipe her grandmother used." Sarah's pride in the food was evident. "It'll be about 10 minutes." As she walked away, Garth noticed a man in his early 50s emerging from what appeared to be an office behind the counter. This had to be the owner. His expensive shoes and pressed polo shirt stood out against the casual dress of the staff. The man's eyes swept the dining room with the calculating gaze of someone constantly measuring profit margins. Marcus Thompson had inherited the diner from his father 5 years ago. And while the food remained excellent thanks to Betty's skills in the kitchen, the warm family atmosphere had gradually cooled under his management. Marcus saw dollar signs where his father had seen neighbors, viewing each table as a revenue opportunity rather than a chance to nourish the community. The afternoon shift was typically slow, which meant less money coming in, and Marcus felt his jaw clench as he surveyed the half-empty dining room. His eyes landed on Garth, taking in the stranger's worn clothes and weathered appearance. Marcus had developed what he considered a keen eye for troublemakers, people who might order the cheapest item on the menu, nurse a single cup of coffee for hours, or worse, cause problems that would drive away his regular customers. Garth was quietly enjoying his tea when he noticed the owner approaching his table. The man's expression wasn't welcoming. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his tone sharp and unfriendly. "I'm the owner here, Marcus Thompson. I need to ask, are you planning to order food, or are you just here to take up space?" The question caught Garth off guard. In all his years of fame, he'd grown accustomed to being treated with excessive courtesy wherever he went. This blunt rudeness was something he hadn't experienced in decades. "I've already ordered," Garth replied calmly. "The fried chicken dinner." Marcus's eyes narrowed as he took in Garth's appearance more closely. The flannel shirt had a small stain on the sleeve, the jeans were faded from honest wear, and those work boots had definitely seen some hard days. To Marcus, this man looked like trouble. Probably a drifter or day laborer who might not even have money to pay for his meal. "Look, friend," Marcus's voice carried a condescending tone that made several nearby diners look up from their meals. "This is a family establishment. We cater to respectable folks from the community. I'm not sure you're the kind of customer we're looking for." The dining room had grown noticeably quieter. Sarah, returning with Garth's biscuits, stopped mid-stride as she heard her boss's words. Betty Williams peered out from the kitchen, her face showing confusion and concern. Garth set down his tea glass with deliberate care. His voice remained steady, but those who knew him well would have recognized the steel beneath the surface. "I'm sorry. What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe you'd be more comfortable at the truck stop down the highway. They're more accommodating to your type." Marcus crossed his arms, making his meaning unmistakably clear. The elderly couple at the nearby table exchanged shocked glances. The young mother gathered her children closer, embarrassed to witness such treatment. Even the teenagers had stopped their football debate to watch the unfolding scene. Garth felt a familiar fire building in his chest. The same fire that had driven him from a young boy in Oklahoma to the stages of the world's biggest arenas. But along with the anger came something else. A profound sadness for this man who had let prejudice and pride poison what should have been a place of welcome. "I see," Garth said quietly, standing slowly from the booth. His movements were controlled, dignified. "Well, Mr. Thompson, I appreciate you making your position clear." Sarah stepped forward, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Sir, I'm so sorry. Your order is almost ready. Please don't—" "It's all right, miss," Garth interrupted gently. "This isn't your fault." He pulled out his wallet and placed a $20 bill on the table. "Far more than the cost of sweet tea. For your trouble." As he walked toward the door, Marcus called out loudly enough for the entire restaurant to hear, "And don't bother coming back. We don't need your kind causing problems for our decent customers." The bell chimed again as Garth stepped outside, but the usual peaceful sound now carried an edge of finality. Several diners had pushed their plates away, their appetites gone. Sarah stood frozen by the table, the $20 bill in her hand, tears of shame welling in her eyes. Outside, Garth sat in his rental car for a long moment, processing what had just occurred. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with messages from his manager, his band, and family members. Tomorrow, he would return to being Garth Brooks the superstar, beloved by millions, welcomed wherever he went. But tonight, he had been just another human being, judged by his appearance and found wanting by a stranger's narrow view of the world. As he started the engine, Garth made a mental note of the restaurant's name and location. Marcus Thompson had no idea who he had just humiliated, but more importantly, he had no idea what he had just set in motion. Sometimes the most powerful responses came not from anger or immediate retribution, but from patience, planning, and the quiet determination to turn a moment of cruelty into an opportunity for profound change. The sun was setting as Garth drove away from Thompson's family diner, but his mind was already working, already planning. By tomorrow, he would be back on stage, performing for thousands who knew his name and sang along to every word. But he would not forget this place, these people, or the lesson that Marcus Thompson desperately needed to learn about judging others by their appearance rather than the content of their character. Word traveled fast in small towns, and by Monday morning, half of Cedar Ridge, Tennessee, had heard about the incident at Thompson's family diner. The story spread through beauty salons, gas stations, and church groups like wildfire, each telling adding new details and growing indignation. At Millie's hair salon, owner Patricia Davis was giving her longtime customer, retired schoolteacher Ellen Foster, her weekly perm when the conversation inevitably turned to Marcus Thompson's behavior. "I heard it from my daughter Sarah," Patricia said, carefully wrapping another section of Ellen's silver hair. "She was working yesterday and saw the whole thing, said it was the most embarrassing moment of her life." Ellen shook her head in disgust. That boy's father would be rolling in his grave. Robert Thompson never turned away a soul from that diner. Didn't matter if they were the mayor or someone down on their luck. Everyone was welcome at Bob's table. "Sarah said the stranger was so polite about it too," Patricia continued, her voice rising with indignation. "Just stood up, paid for his tea, and left without causing a scene." Most folks would have given Marcus a piece of their mind. At the gas station across the street, mechanic Tom Bradley was sharing the story with Alan Jackson. Not the famous singer, but the local insurance agent who shared the name. Alan had stopped by to fill up his truck before making his rounds to local farms and businesses. "The way I heard it, Marcus practically accused the man of being a vagrant," Tom said, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. "Right there in front of God and everybody. My wife was there with the kids, and she said our youngest asked why that man was being so mean to the stranger." Alan Jackson shook his head while pumping gas. "Marcus has been getting worse ever since his daddy passed. Used to be that diner was the heart of this community. Now, it feels more like a business that happens to serve food. You know what really gets me?" Tom continued. "That stranger left a $20 tip for just a glass of sweet tea. Sarah said she tried to return it, but he insisted she keep it. That tell you anything about his character versus Marcus's?" The story reached the Cedar Ridge Baptist Church during Tuesday evening's potluck dinner. Pastor William Grant, a gentleman in his 60s who had served the community for over 20 years, listened with growing concern as several parishioners recounted the incident. "It's not Christian," declared Rose Murphy, the church organist and unofficial keeper of community morals. "The good book teaches us to welcome strangers, not judge them by their appearance. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it." "Amen to that," agreed James Crawford, a local farmer who had known the Thompson family for decades. Bob Thompson lived by those words. His son seems to have forgotten them entirely. Meanwhile, at Thompson's family diner, the atmosphere had grown noticeably tense. Regular customers who had witnessed Sunday's incident were treating Marcus with cool politeness, their usual friendly banter replaced by stiff formality. Several families had quietly stopped coming altogether, choosing to drive the extra 15 miles to the next town for their meals out. Sarah Mitchell was struggling with her conscience as she served tables Tuesday evening. She had worked for Marcus for 2 years, needing the job to support her young son after her divorce. But watching an innocent man be humiliated for no reason other than his appearance had shaken her faith in her employer. "Betty," she said to the cook during a quiet moment, "I keep thinking about Sunday. That poor man didn't deserve what Marcus did to him." Betty Williams, who had been the diner's cook since Marcus's father owned it, nodded grimly while flipping burgers on the grill. "In all my years here, I never saw anything like it. Mr. Bob would have welcomed that man with open arms and probably sent him home with leftovers. The way he handled it, though," Sarah continued, "so dignified. Most people would have caused a scene, but he just accepted it and left. There was something about him, something that made Marcus's behavior look even worse." Betty paused in her cooking, a thoughtful expression crossing her weathered face. "You know, there was something familiar about that stranger. Can't put my finger on it, but I felt like I'd seen him before." "Really? Where?" "That's what I can't figure out. But mark my words, girl, that wasn't just any ordinary man Marcus threw out of here." Marcus himself seemed oblivious to the growing discontent among his staff and customers. If anything, he felt vindicated by his actions. The stranger hadn't caused trouble, hadn't tried to argue or make a scene. Proof, in Marcus's mind, that he had correctly identified a potential problem and handled it appropriately. On Wednesday morning, Marcus was reviewing the week's receipts when he noticed the slight dip in business. Tuesday night had been particularly slow, with several empty tables during what should have been the dinner rush. But Marcus attributed this to the normal fluctuations of small-town dining rather than any consequence of his actions. "Sarah," he called to his waitress as she prepared for the lunch shift, "we need to do something about attracting more customers. Maybe run some kind of special or promotion." Sarah bit back her first response, instead saying carefully, "Maybe we should focus on making sure the customers we have feel welcome." Marcus looked at her sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, Mr. Thompson. Just that word of mouth is everything in a small town. People remember how they're treated." "Well, I remember that we're running a business, not a charity. If people want to eat here, they need to respect our standards." Sarah turned away to hide her expression. Those standards seemed to apply only to people Marcus deemed unworthy based on their appearance, not to the quality of service or the values that had once made Thompson's a beloved community institution. That afternoon, insurance agent Alan Jackson was making his regular rounds when he stopped by the farm of Daniel Henderson, one of his longtime clients. Daniel was a successful cattle rancher who had recently returned from a business trip to Nashville. "You hear about the commotion at Thompson's?" Alan asked as they reviewed Daniel's policy renewal. "I did. Shame what that place has become under Marcus." Daniel paused, looking thoughtful. "You know, the description of that stranger sounds familiar. When I was in Nashville last week, I saw posters all over town for some big country music tour. One of the artists looked remarkably like what people are saying about the man Marcus threw out." Alan raised an eyebrow. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "I'm thinking Marcus Thompson might have just made the biggest mistake of his life." By Thursday, speculation about the stranger's identity had begun to spread through certain circles of the community. Daniel Henderson wasn't the only one who had started to wonder if there was more to Sunday's incident than met the eye. Patricia Davis had a customer who worked at a music venue in Nashville, and when she described the stranger's appearance, the kind eyes, the humble demeanor, the way he carried himself with quiet confidence, her customer's eyes went wide. "Patricia," she said carefully, "you don't suppose—" "No, that would be impossible." "What would be impossible?" "Well, there's this country singer, huge star, known for being down-to-earth and kind to everyone he meets. The description fits him perfectly. And I know he's been touring through Tennessee." The possibility seemed too incredible to believe, But as Thursday turned to Friday, more pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Betty Williams remembered where she thought she had seen the stranger before. On television, accepting an award and talking about his love for ordinary Americans and small-town values. Sarah Mitchell, who had gone home and looked up recent country music news online, felt her heart sink as she realized what might have really happened on Sunday. If their customer had been who she now suspected, then Marcus hadn't just humiliated a stranger. He had humiliated one of America's most beloved entertainers, a man known throughout the industry for his kindness and generosity. But even if their suspicions were correct, what could they do about it now? The damage was done, the stranger was gone, and Marcus remained blissfully unaware that his moment of cruel judgment might have just destroyed everything his father had built. As Friday evening settled over Cedar Ridge, the community was buzzing with whispered speculation and growing certainty. By the weekend, they would know for sure. And when they did, Marcus Thompson would discover that actions have consequences. And sometimes those consequences come from the most unexpected places. The stage was set for a reckoning, one that would test not just Marcus's character, but the character of an entire community. The question was no longer what would happen, but when, and whether Cedar Ridge was ready for the storm that was about to break over Thompson's family diner. Saturday morning brought an unseasonably warm breeze to Cedar Ridge, along with confirmation of what half the town had begun to suspect. Patricia Davis was opening Millie's hair salon when her phone rang with a call that would change everything. "Patricia, this is Jennifer Walsh from the Nashville Scene magazine," the voice on the other end said. "I'm calling about an incident that occurred at Thompson's family diner last Sunday. We have reliable information that Garth Brooks was humiliated and ejected from the establishment. Can you confirm this?" Patricia's hand trembled as she held the phone. How did you... Mr. Brooks's tour manager contacted us. Apparently, several fans in the area recognized him and posted about the incident on social media. The story is about to break nationwide. I wanted to get the local perspective before we publish. Within an hour, Patricia had called every number in her phone. By noon, the news had spread through Cedar Ridge like a summer wildfire. Garth Brooks, the Garth Brooks, had been in their little town, had sat in Thompson's diner, and had been thrown out like a common vagrant by Marcus Thompson. At the gas station, Tom Bradley was fielding calls from reporters while trying to serve customers who were equally shocked and embarrassed by the news. "Is it true that Garth Brooks was discriminated against at a local restaurant?" asked a reporter from Country Music Television. "All I know is that a good man was treated badly," Tom replied carefully. "Whether he's famous or not doesn't change the fact that what happened was wrong." Sarah Mitchell arrived at the diner for her Saturday shift to find Marcus pacing behind the counter, his face pale and his hands shaking. He had just gotten off the phone with his third reporter in 30 minutes. "This can't be happening," Marcus muttered as Sarah hung up her apron. "They're saying Garth Brooks was here. That's impossible. Garth Brooks doesn't just walk into diners in small towns." "Actually, Mr. Thompson," Sarah said quietly, "he does. It's kind of what he's famous for, being a regular person despite his success." Marcus stared at her. "You knew? You knew and you didn't tell me?" "I suspected, but I wasn't sure until this morning. And honestly, would it have mattered? Would you have treated him differently if you'd known he was famous?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus wanted to say yes. Of course, he would have treated a celebrity with respect, but the words stuck in his throat because they both knew the truth. He had judged the man solely based on his appearance, and no amount of fame should have been necessary to ensure basic human dignity. Betty Williams emerged from the kitchen, her face grim. "Marcus, I just got a call from my daughter in Memphis. The story's all over the radio. They're calling it the diner that turned away America's sweetheart. "This will ruin us," Marcus said, sinking into a chair. "When people find out what really happened." "What really happened," Betty interrupted, "is that you forgot everything your father taught you about treating people with respect. This isn't about Garth Brooks being famous. This is about you treating a human being like dirt because you didn't like how he looked." The lunch rush that Saturday was unlike anything Thompsons had seen in years, but not in a good way. Cars lined the street as curiosity seekers and reporters descended on the small diner. Some came hoping to catch a glimpse of where the incident occurred, others to interview staff and witnesses. Marcus found himself trapped behind his own counter as cameras rolled and questions flew. "Mr. Thompson, why did you eject Garth Brooks from your restaurant? Did you know who he was when you asked him to leave? What do you have to say to fans who are calling for a boycott of your business?" I didn't know," Marcus stammered, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "If I had known." "So you only treat famous people with respect?" pressed a reporter from Nashville's Channel 4 News. The question hit like a physical blow. Marcus realized that any answer would make him look worse. If he said yes, he was admitting to being a sycophant who only cared about celebrity. If he said no, then his treatment of the stranger was even more indefensible. By evening, the story had gone national. CNN picked it up, then Fox News. Social media exploded with the Garth Brooks challenge posts, where people shared stories of times they had been judged by their appearance. The hashtag Respect for All began trending, with Garth Brooks fans and country music lovers expressing their disappointment in Thompson's diner. Pastor William Grant watched the news coverage with a heavy heart. He had known Marcus since he was a boy, had baptized him in Cedar Ridge Creek when he was 12 years old. This wasn't the child he remembered, who had helped his father serve Thanksgiving dinner to anyone in town who needed a meal. That evening, Pastor Grant drove to the diner as Marcus was closing up. Through the window, he could see the broken man sitting alone in a booth, his head in his hands. "Marcus," Pastor Grant said softly as he entered, "I thought you might need someone to talk to." Marcus looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "Pastor Grant, I've really messed up this time, haven't I?" "That depends," the pastor replied, sliding into the booth across from him. "What are you going to do about it?" "What can I do? The whole world thinks I'm a monster. My business is ruined. Even if I apologize, who's going to believe it's sincere now that everyone knows who he was?" "Marcus, I want you to think about something. If you had treated that man, Garth Brooks or not, with the kindness your father showed everyone who walked through that door, would we be having this conversation?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "No. Your father used to say that every person who walked through that door was somebody's child, somebody's parent, somebody's hope. He treated the richest man in town the same as he treated the poorest. That's what made this place special." "I know. I thought I was protecting the business. I was worried about—" Marcus trailed off, realizing how shallow his excuses sounded. "You were worried about what, son?" "About people who might not spend much money. About maintaining our reputation. About keeping the right kind of customers." The words tasted bitter as he spoke them. Pastor Grant nodded sadly. "And in trying to protect your version of success, you lost sight of what real success looks like. Your father's success wasn't measured in dollars, Marcus. It was measured in the number of people who felt welcome, fed, and cared for in this place." As they sat in the dim light of the empty diner, Marcus began to understand the magnitude of what he had lost. It wasn't just the humiliation of a famous customer. It was the betrayal of everything the diner had once stood for. Outside, the last of the news trucks was packing up. The reporters had their story. The cameras had their footage. But inside Thompson's family diner, a broken man was finally beginning to see clearly for the first time in years. The question now was whether it was too late for redemption and whether Marcus Thompson had the courage to face the consequences of his actions, not because the world was watching, but because it was the right thing to do. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new headlines, and the beginning of what might be the longest road Marcus had ever traveled. But tonight, sitting across from the pastor who had known him since childhood, he took the first step toward understanding what his father had really been trying to teach him all along. Monday morning brought a media circus unlike anything Cedar Ridge had ever experienced. News vans lined Main Street, satellite dishes pointed skyward, and reporters with perfectly styled hair stood in front of Thompson's family diner, delivering updates to national audiences. Marcus hadn't slept in 2 days. The phone calls had been relentless. Reporters, angry customers, and curious strangers all wanting to know about the man who had humiliated America's country music sweetheart. His answering machine was full of messages ranging from death threats to offers from talk shows wanting him to appear and tell his side of the story. Sarah Mitchell arrived for her shift to find Marcus sitting in his car in the parking lot, apparently afraid to enter his own restaurant. She tapped on his window gently. "Mr. Thompson? We need to open. People are waiting." Marcus looked up at her with hollow eyes. "Sarah, maybe you should find another job. After all this dies down, there might not be anything left here to save." "Maybe not," she replied. "But I've been thinking about what happened, and I keep coming back to something. That man, Mr. Brooks, he could have made a scene. He could have revealed who he was right there in front of everyone. But he didn't. He just left quietly. Don't you think that says something about his character?" Marcus nodded miserably. "It says he's a better man than I am." They opened the diner to find a line of people waiting outside. But these weren't their usual customers. Some were reporters, others were curious onlookers, and a few appeared to be protesters holding signs reading, "Respect all people," and "Apologize to Garth." The morning was chaotic. Orders backed up in the kitchen as Betty Williams tried to cook while reporters attempted to interview her through the service window. Sarah struggled to take orders while dodging microphones and cameras. Marcus retreated to his office, overwhelmed by the circus his actions had created. Then, around 11:30, something extraordinary happened. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled into the parking lot. The crowd of reporters immediately surged toward it, cameras flashing and questions flying. But instead of Garth Brooks, out stepped a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying clearly over the commotion, "my name is Jessica Turner, and I represent Mr. Garth Brooks. He has asked me to deliver a message to Mr. Marcus Thompson and the community of Cedar Ridge." The crowd fell silent. Every microphone and camera focused on her. Mr. Brooks wants everyone to know that he holds no ill will toward Mr. Thompson or Thompson's family diner. He understands that people sometimes make mistakes when they're under pressure, and he believes that judgment and condemnation are not the answer to this situation. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This wasn't the angry response many had expected. Jessica Turner continued, "Mr. Brooks has learned that Thompson's family diner has been a cornerstone of the Cedar Ridge community for over 30 years, providing employment and serving as a gathering place for families. He would hate to see that legacy destroyed by one unfortunate moment." She paused, letting her words sink in before delivering the real surprise. "Therefore, Mr. Brooks has asked me to announce that he will be making a donation to establish the Thompson Family Diner Community Fund. This fund will help the restaurant implement programs to serve the community better, including free meals for families in need, senior citizen discounts, and job training programs for young people. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers and frantic note-taking. Additionally, Jessica continued, Mr. Brooks will be returning to Cedar Ridge this weekend to perform a free concert in the town park. All proceeds from merchandise sales will go to local charities chosen by the community. A reporter shouted out, "What does Mr. Brooks want from Mr. Thompson in return?" Jessica Turner smiled. Nothing. He simply hopes that this experience will remind all of us, himself included, about the importance of treating every person we meet with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance or circumstances. Inside the diner, Marcus watched through the window in stunned disbelief. Sarah stood beside him, tears streaming down her face. "He's not trying to destroy you," she whispered. "He's trying to save you." Betty Williams emerged from the kitchen, flour still dusting her apron. "That man just turned the worst thing that could happen to us into a blessing. How do you respond to something like that?" Marcus felt his knees go weak. He had spent the past 3 days expecting retribution, legal action, or at the very least a scathing public condemnation. Instead, he was being offered grace he knew he didn't deserve. The reporters were still shouting questions at Jessica Turner when Marcus finally found the courage to step outside. The crowd turned toward him like a single organism, cameras swiveling and microphones thrusting in his direction. "Mr. Thompson," voices called out. "What's your response to Garth Brooks's announcement?" Marcus stood there for a moment, overwhelmed by the attention and the unexpected kindness he had just witnessed. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't deserve this. Can you speak up, sir?" Marcus cleared his throat and tried again, his voice stronger but heavy with emotion. "I said I don't deserve this kindness. What I did to Mr. Brooks was wrong. It was prejudiced and cruel, and no person should ever be treated the way I treated him." The crowd grew quiet, sensing the genuine remorse in his voice. "Mr. Brooks has shown me something today about grace and forgiveness that I don't know if I would have been capable of showing in his position. He could have destroyed my business, my reputation, my life. Instead, he's trying to help my community." Marcus paused, struggling with emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "I want to apologize, not just to Mr. Brooks, but to anyone who has ever felt unwelcome in my establishment. My father built this diner on the principle that everyone deserves respect and a good meal. I lost sight of that, and I'm sorry." A reporter called out, "Are you only apologizing because you found out he was famous?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow, but it was one he needed to face. "That's a fair question, and I understand why you'd ask it. The honest answer is that finding out he was Garth Brooks made me realize how many people witnessed my behavior and would judge me for it. But sitting here these past few days, thinking about what I did, I realized that even if he had been exactly who I thought he was, just a regular person down on his luck, what I did was still wrong." Marcus looked directly into the nearest camera. "Mr. Brooks, if you're watching this, I want you to know that I am deeply, truly sorry. Not because you're famous, but because you're a human being who deserved better. You handled my rudeness with more dignity than I handled, well, anything. Thank you for showing me what grace looks like." As the reporters continued their questions, Pastor Grant appeared at Marcus's side, offering silent support. Sarah and Betty emerged from the diner to stand behind their boss, showing that despite everything, they believed in the possibility of redemption. That evening, as the news trucks finally began to leave and Cedar Ridge settled into an unusual quiet, Marcus sat alone in his diner, reading the flood of messages that had poured in throughout the day. Mixed among the criticism and condemnation were notes of encouragement from people who had made their own mistakes and found their way back to Grace. One message, forwarded through Jessica Turner's office, stood out from all the rest. Mr. Thompson, we all fall short sometimes. The measure of a man isn't whether he falls, but whether he gets back up and tries to do better. I believe in second chances, and I hope Cedar Ridge will give you yours. Looking forward to visiting your diner again soon. Garth? Marcus read the message 3 times before the tears finally came. Not tears of shame or self-pity, but tears of gratitude for a grace he never could have imagined and didn't deserve, but had been given anyway. The real work was just beginning. Words were easy. Changing a heart and rebuilding trust would take time. But for the first time in days, Marcus Thompson felt something he hadn't expected to feel again: hope. Saturday arrived in Cedar Ridge with an electricity in the air that hadn't been felt since the county fair 20 years ago. By dawn, cars were streaming into the small town from across Tennessee and neighboring states. The population of Cedar Ridge, normally hovering around 2,800 people, had swollen to nearly 15,000 as Garth Brooks fans made their pilgrimage to witness something unprecedented: a free concert by one of country music's biggest stars, all because of an act of grace that had captured the nation's attention. Marcus Thompson stood in his diner at 5 in the morning, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The past week had been a whirlwind of interviews, apologies, and soul-searching that had left him exhausted, but strangely hopeful. Today would either mark the beginning of his redemption or the final nail in the coffin of everything his family had built. The sound of vehicles pulling into the parking lot drew his attention. A convoy of black SUVs and equipment trucks was arriving, along with a modest RV that bore no identifying marks. Marcus's heart began to pound as he realized that Garth Brooks had arrived early, probably hoping to avoid the crowds that would soon descend on Cedar Ridge. The diner's front door chimed softly as a figure in jeans, work boots, and a simple T-shirt entered. Without the worn flannel shirt and baseball cap, Garth Brooks looked different, more polished, but somehow smaller than Marcus had imagined a superstar would be. The kind eyes were the same, though, and Marcus felt a rush of shame as he remembered how dismissively he had looked into those same eyes just 1 week ago. "Mr. Thompson?" Garth's voice was gentle, carrying none of the anger or superiority that Marcus felt he deserved. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by early. I wanted to speak with you before the chaos begins." Marcus had rehearsed this moment 100 times in his mind, but now, faced with the man he had wronged, words seemed inadequate. "Mr. Brooks, I don't know how to thank you for what you've done. I don't deserve your kindness." Garth settled into the same booth where he had sat the previous Sunday, gesturing for Marcus to join him. "You know, Marcus, can I call you Marcus? I've been thinking a lot about this past week, about judgment, forgiveness, and second chances. Sir, I owe you an apology that goes deeper than anything I said to those reporters." "And I appreciate that," Garth replied. "But I want you to understand something. I didn't come back here to humiliate you or to prove a point. I came back because I believe in the power of redemption, and because I think this community deserves to keep its gathering place." Betty Williams appeared from the kitchen, her face a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Mr. Brooks, I'm Betty Williams, the cook here. I just wanted to say, well, I'm sorry for what happened to you, and I'm grateful for what you're doing for our town." Garth stood and shook her hand warmly. "Betty, I've heard wonderful things about your cooking. I was looking forward to trying those biscuits of yours last week. Well, you just sit right there, and I'll fix you a proper breakfast. On the house, of course." As Betty bustled back to the kitchen, Garth turned his attention back to Marcus. "Tell me about your father. I understand he built this place." For the next hour, as the sun climbed higher and the sounds of the gathering crowd grew louder outside, Marcus found himself sharing stories he hadn't told in years. He talked about his father's philosophy of service, about the way the diner had once been the heart of the community, about his own fears and pressures that had led him to make the worst decision of his life. Garth listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that helped Marcus dig deeper into his own motivations and regrets. When Betty brought out a plate of her famous biscuits, along with eggs, bacon, and hash browns, Garth ate with obvious appreciation while continuing to draw Marcus out. "These biscuits are incredible, Betty," Garth called toward the kitchen. "My grandmother would have been impressed." "Your grandmother was a cook?" Marcus asked. "Oh yes. Taught me that food made with love tastes different than food made just to fill stomachs. That's what I taste here. Love for the craft. Pride in the work." Garth paused meaningfully. "That's worth preserving." By 8 o'clock, Sarah Mitchell had arrived to find her boss and the country music superstar deep in conversation like old friends. She hesitated at the door, unsure whether to interrupt. "Sarah, come on in," Marcus called. "Mr. Brooks, this is Sarah Mitchell, our waitress. She's the one who tried to make up for my rudeness last Sunday." Garth stood and shook Sarah's hand. "Sarah, I want to thank you for your kindness that day. In all the chaos that followed, I never got to properly appreciate how you tried to make things right." "I just did what anyone should do," Sarah replied, blushing slightly. "That's exactly my point. What anyone should do and what actually happens aren't always the same thing. You stood up for what was right, even when it might have cost you your job." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Alan Jackson, the insurance agent, not the singer, peered through the glass with an apologetic expression. "Come on in, Alan," Marcus called. "Mr. Brooks, this is Alan Jackson. He's been insuring local businesses here for 20 years." "Alan Jackson?" Garth grinned and stood to shake hands. "Well, that's a name I recognize. Any relation to the singer?" Alan laughed. "No, sir. Though I get asked that a lot. I was named for my grandfather, and I've been dealing with the confusion my whole life. Folks around here just call me Insurance Alan to keep things straight." "Well, Insurance Alan, it's good to meet you. I understand you've been taking care of Marcus and the other businesses around here." "Yes, sir. And I wanted to thank you personally for what you're doing today. This town was hurting after what happened. And your response, well, it's shown all of us something about character that we won't forget." As the morning progressed, more community members stopped by to meet Garth and express their gratitude. Pastor Grant arrived with his wife, followed by Daniel Henderson, the rancher who had first suspected the stranger's identity. Patricia Davis closed her salon early to bring her teenage daughter, who was a huge Garth Brooks fan. Each interaction revealed something new about the fabric of Cedar Ridge's community. These weren't just customers of the diner. They were neighbors, friends, families who had been gathering at Thompson's for decades. Their stories painted a picture of a place where everyone truly did know everyone else, where children grew up and brought their own children, where celebrations and sorrows were shared over Betty's cooking and Robert Thompson's warm hospitality. "Marcus," Garth said during a quiet moment as the morning crowd thinned out, "I want you to understand what you have here. This isn't just a business. It's a legacy. Your father created something beautiful, and these people are counting on you to preserve it. I know that now. I just don't know if I can earn back their trust." "Trust is earned one interaction at a time," Garth replied. "Every person who walks through that door is an opportunity to do better than you did the day before. It's not about being perfect. It's about being committed to treating every person with dignity." Around noon, the sounds from outside became impossible to ignore. The concert wasn't scheduled to begin until 4 o'clock, but thousands of people had already arrived. turning the sleepy downtown into a festival atmosphere. Vendors were setting up booths, local churches were selling barbecue to raise funds, and children ran between the crowds with excitement. "I should probably go sound check soon," Garth said, glancing toward the window. "But before I do, I want to ask you something. What are you going to do differently going forward?" Marcus had been dreading this question, because it forced him to articulate changes he was still figuring out himself. "I've been thinking about that all week. First, I want to implement the community programs you mentioned. Free meals for families in need, job training for young people, senior discounts. But more than that, I want to create a culture here where everyone feels welcome." "How?" "Training for my staff on treating all customers with respect, not just the ones who look like they have money. Community bulletin boards where people can post about neighbors who need help. Maybe monthly dinners for seniors or single parents. I want this place to be what my father intended, a home for everyone." Garth nodded approvingly. "Those are good concrete steps. But what about the harder work? Changing your own heart and mind?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering the question that went to the core of everything. "I think I need to spend more time listening to people instead of judging them. I realize I've been living in my own bubble, making assumptions about people based on how they look or how much money I think they have. I want to learn their stories instead." "That's wisdom, Marcus. Real wisdom." At 2 o'clock, Garth finally stood to leave for his sound check. The diner had been bustling all day with visitors wanting to see the place where the incident occurred, but also locals who seemed determined to show their support for Marcus's efforts to change. "Mr. Brooks," Marcus said as they reached the door, "I know I can never fully repay what you've done for us, but I want you to know that I won't waste this second chance." Garth paused with his hand on the door handle. "Marcus, the best way to repay me is to pay it forward. Every time you choose kindness over judgment, every time you welcome someone others might turn away, every time you treat a stranger like family, that's how you honor what happened here. And if I mess up again, when you mess up again," Garth corrected with a gentle smile, "because we all do, you apologize, make it right, and try to do better the next time. That's what grace means, not that we're perfect, but that we're committed to growing." As Garth stepped outside into the crowd, cheers erupted from the thousands of people who had been waiting for a glimpse of their hero. But inside the diner, Marcus felt a different kind of appreciation. Not for a celebrity, but for a man who had shown him what true leadership and character looked like. The concert that afternoon was everything the community could have hoped for and more. Garth performed for over 2 hours, mixing his greatest hits with songs that seemed chosen specifically for the moment. When he sang "Friends in Low Places," the irony wasn't lost on anyone. When he performed "The Dance," the lyrics about not knowing if the pain of loss was worth the joy of love took on new meaning in the context of second chances and redemption. But the moment that brought the crowd to tears was when Garth called Marcus up on stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Garth said into the microphone, "I want to introduce you to someone who has shown incredible courage this week. It takes a special kind of strength to admit when you're wrong, to face your mistakes publicly, and to commit to doing better. Marcus Thompson, everyone." The applause was thunderous, but more than that, it was genuine. The crowd wasn't just being polite. They were celebrating a neighbor's journey toward redemption. "Marcus," Garth continued, "would you like to say something to all these folks who came out to support your community?" Marcus took the microphone with shaking hands, looking out at a sea of faces that stretched beyond the park and into the surrounding streets. For a moment, he was overwhelmed by the magnitude of forgiveness and support surrounding him. "I want to thank all of you for coming," he began, his voice growing stronger as he spoke. "A week ago, I thought success meant having the right kind of customers and making the most profit. Today, I understand that real success means serving everyone with dignity and being a positive part of the community that supports you." He paused, looking directly at Garth. "Mr. Brooks has shown me that how we respond to someone's worst moment says more about our character than anything else we do. I hope to spend the rest of my life living up to the grace I've been shown here." The crowd erupted again, and as Marcus handed back the microphone, Garth pulled him into a bear hug that communicated more than words ever could. As the sun set over Cedar Ridge and the last notes of "Friends in Low Places" echoed across the park, something had fundamentally changed in the small Tennessee town. Thompson's Family Diner would never again be just a place to eat. It would be a symbol of redemption, second chances, and the power of choosing grace over judgment. In the weeks that followed, the changes at Thompson's became the stuff of local legend. Marcus instituted Community Mondays, where seniors ate free and local musicians performed. He started Second Chance Thursdays, hiring people who had struggled to find work elsewhere and training them in both food service and life skills. The bulletin board Marcus had envisioned became a hub of community support, where neighbors helped neighbors find jobs, rides, and friendship. Sarah Mitchell was promoted to assistant manager, with a raise that finally allowed her to stop worrying about making rent. Betty Williams was given the title of head chef and a stake in the restaurant's profits. Most importantly, Marcus spent time each day simply talking to customers, learning their stories, and rebuilding the relationships his father had valued above all else. The Thompson Family Diner Community Fund that Garth had established grew beyond anyone's expectations. Funded not just by the singer's initial donation, but by contributions from visitors who had heard the story and wanted to be part of something positive. The fund helped dozens of families through difficult times, provided scholarships for local students, and supported community events that brought people together. But perhaps the most significant change was in Marcus himself. The man who had once judged people by their appearance learned to see past surface details to the humanity beneath. He discovered that the elderly man who came in every Tuesday morning and ordered only coffee and a biscuit was a veteran living on a fixed income. So Marcus quietly began including soup and a sandwich on the house. He learned that the young mother who always seemed stressed was working 2 jobs to support her children after her husband's death. So he offered her flexible part-time work that allowed her to be home when her kids got out of school. 6 months after Garth Brooks's concert, a travel magazine featured Thompson's Family Diner in an article about places where America gets it right. The article highlighted not just the food or the famous incident, but the transformation of a business into a genuine community center where everyone was welcomed, valued, and cared for. Marcus framed the article and hung it next to a photo from the concert. Not the shot of him on stage with Garth, but a picture of the crowd. Thousands of people who had come together to celebrate forgiveness, redemption, and the power of second chances. On the first anniversary of the incident, as locals had come to call it, Marcus found a package waiting for him when he arrived to open the diner. Inside was a simple card. Marcus, heard about all the good things happening at Thompson's. Your father would be proud. Keep up the good work. Your friend, Garth. Along with the card was a photograph. Garth Brooks sitting in the booth where it all began, smiling over a plate of Betty's biscuits with a handwritten note on the back. Sometimes the best meals come with the best company. Thanks for the reminder that everyone deserves a place at the table. Marcus wiped away tears as he hung the photograph behind the counter, right next to the pictures of his father and the community his family had served for generations. Below it, he placed a small sign that had become the unofficial motto of the new Thompson's Family Diner. Everyone welcome. Everyone valued. Everyone family. As the morning sun streamed through the windows of Thompson's family diner, Marcus Thompson unlocked the door and prepared for another day of serving his community. But now, instead of seeing potential problems or profit margins when customers walked in, he saw neighbors, friends, and opportunities to live up to the grace he had been shown. The transformation was complete, not just of a restaurant, but of a man who had learned that true success isn't measured by who you exclude, but by how many people you can welcome home. And in a world that often seemed divided by differences, Thompson's family diner stood as a beacon of what was possible when people chose love over fear, grace over judgment, and inclusion over exclusion. It wasn't perfect, nothing involving human beings ever is, but it was real, it was sincere, and it was making a difference one meal, one conversation, and one welcomed stranger at a time. The story of what happened when Garth Brooks was humiliated at a small-town diner had become something much larger than anyone could have imagined. A testament to the power of redemption and the truth that everyone, no matter what they look like or where they come from, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. In Cedar Ridge, Tennessee, that lesson was being lived out every day, one customer at a time, at Thompson's family diner, where everyone was welcome, everyone was valued, and everyone was family.